Welcome to Life Stories. Have you ever been humiliated by the people who were supposed to have your back? Imagine sitting in a room full of strangers trying to land your dream job, only to have your own family tear you down in front of everyone. But here's the twist. What if the very people who tried to break you are the ones who end up watching you rise? This is the story of a woman pushed to her breaking point, only to realize her greatest strength lies in her ability to rebuild herself from the ground up. Stick around to find out how a single moment of rejection can ignite a fire that no one saw coming. Let's dive into this incredible journey. The air in the conference room was thick with a mixture of tension and cold professionalism. Glass walls surrounded the panelists, reflecting the sterile glow of sleek lights that buzzed faintly overhead. Samantha Marin stood near the door, her fingers clutching the soft corners of her resume folder. She had rehearsed her every move in the mirror this morning, straightening her posture, adjusting the hem of her blazer, practicing the exact words she would say when they called her name. But now, as she entered the room, the rehearsed confidence felt like a fragile mask she could barely hold up. Tech World Corp, the company she had worked years for, had now become the battleground for her dignity. The buzz in the room was palpable, thick with murmurs of candidates exchanging polite smiles and nervous laughter. Most of them were polished, confident, and somehow already part of the inner circle. Samantha, on the other hand, had come in late, scrambling for a seat that wasn't even in the circle of power, placed awkwardly just outside it. The chair felt like a metaphor for her entire existence, a space that was never meant for her. She tried not to look at the panel, but she couldn't help it. Her sister Rachel sat among them, dressed in a silk blouse that shimmered like wealth itself, her lips curled into an expression that could have been mistaken for a smile, but was, in fact, a sneer. Samantha didn't need to look twice to know that Rachel, her older sister, who had once been the golden child of their family, was the one who had orchestrated every failure she had ever endured. Rachel had been the one to twist her stories, downplay her achievements, and sabotage her career whenever it seemed like Samantha might be gaining any ground. Samantha forced a breath, feeling the weight of the moment in her chest. The room was full of strangers, candidates who had nothing to do with her life, but all her memories, her years of proving herself, flashed before her eyes. And there she was, watching it unfold, in a room that could never be hers, always overshadowed by Rachel's brilliance, by the myth of her own inadequacy. "Would anyone like coffee?" an assistant asked, interrupting her thoughts. Everyone took a cup, except her. Rachel smirked over her mug, casting a glance in Samantha's direction that wasn't lost on anyone. Not a word was spoken, but the silence weighed heavier than any words could. Rachel leaned towards the woman next to her and whispered just loud enough for Samantha to hear. "She's still dressing like she shops at college clearance sales." Samantha's stomach curled at the words, but she held her ground. Her eyes stayed on the table, on the grain of the fake wood beneath her hands. She couldn't let Rachel see her pain, couldn't let her feed off it. She wasn't just here for a job. She was here to prove something, to herself. The years of being belittled, erased by her own family, by Rachel's calculated cruelty, had come to this. One moment, one chance to stop shrinking and start being seen. They called her name, and as she stood, Samantha walked to the front. She placed her resume on the table, a calmness she didn't feel sweeping over her as Rachel barely glanced at it before sliding it away like it didn't even matter. It was familiar, the rejection, the dismissal, but this time, Samantha didn't look away. This time, she wasn't running. "Next," Greg, one of the senior panelists, called, glancing at his watch. The questions flew, rapid and pointed, but Samantha didn't flinch. She had been prepared for this. For years, she had worked in silence, learning, growing, all while Rachel had stolen her ideas, taken credit for what was rightfully hers. Samantha had learned to carry the weight of failure with grace, but she had also learned something more. Her resilience was stronger than the walls they put around her. Then, it happened. Samantha had finished her answer and was about to return to her seat when Greg leaned forward. His tone was mocking, dripping with condescension. "So," he asked, spinning a pen between his fingers, "what makes you think you're ready for the big leagues?" Before she could respond, Rachel reached for her resume again, this time with a swift, dismissive motion. The red ink of her pen sliced across the page like a wound, and in bold block letters, Rachel wrote, "Unqualified." The blood-red ink bled through the paper, staining the resume as if it had never mattered. Samantha felt the weight of it, but she did not flinch. She would not give them that satisfaction. "Cute little freelance projects, huh?" Rachel interrupted, her voice dripping with derision. Samantha swallowed the bitterness that rose in her throat. She had been through worse. She had been torn apart by family, by people she trusted, people who should have been her supporters. But now it was different. This time she would not shrink. She had spent too long folding herself to fit into their narrow expectations. Not anymore. The meeting dragged on, the others asking questions, not even pretending to look at her. They passed over her like she was nothing, part of the decor. But then, just as Samantha was ready to give up on the charade and leave, Greg, with his smug smile, threw her the final challenge. "Show us what you're really made of, then." Samantha's heart raced. She wasn't going to run. Not this time. As she sat down, the weight of her decisions, of everything she had worked for, settled in her chest. She reached for the paper, her hand steady. She wasn't going to beg. She wasn't going to let them define her. But they had left something out, something they couldn't take from her. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Victor, one of her colleagues at a smaller startup, asking how the interview went. For a second, her fingers hovered over the screen, ready to type to admit defeat. But she stopped. She didn't owe them an explanation. Instead, she typed just one word: "Fine." And with that, she stood up, walking to the door. But she wasn't done. The elevator dinged, a harsh sound cutting through the tension. As Samantha stepped off, a part of her felt a shift. She wasn't just leaving, she was coming back. She had something they had all overlooked, and soon they would see it. Have you ever been overlooked by the people you trusted the most? How did you rise above it? What happens when the person who's always had control finally loses their grip? Stay tuned to find out how Samantha's next move changes everything. Samantha stood in the elevator, her heart still pounding from the encounter in the conference room. The metallic hum of the lift was the only sound she could hear as she tried to steady her breath. Her fingers curled tightly around the edges of her resume folder, the same folder that had been shredded and discarded like yesterday's news, like she didn't matter at all. But now, as she stood there alone in the quiet of the elevator, something shifted inside her. It wasn't just the sting of rejection. It was the sudden, sharp clarity of what she had been holding on to for so long. The desire to prove herself to people who never truly cared about her in the first place. She had spent years bending, shrinking, trying to earn their approval, trying to make them see her as more than just the little sister who never quite measured up. But this time was different. This time, she wouldn't let them define her. The elevator doors slid open with a soft ding, and she stepped out into the cold, sterile hallway of the corporate building. The harsh lighting above her felt like a spotlight, but instead of making her feel exposed, it was as if it were lighting the way forward. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew it wasn't home. Not yet. She needed to breathe, to clear her head. She needed to move, to feel something other than the crushing weight of her failure. Her phone buzzed again, and she glanced down. Another message from Victor. How did it go? She stared at the screen for a moment. How could she even begin to explain? How could she tell him about the crushing humiliation, about the way Rachel had looked at her as if she were nothing more than an afterthought? The way the entire room had dismissed her with just a glance, as though her worth could be measured by a resume, by her appearance, by the expectations of people who would never understand her struggle? She couldn't. Not yet. Not until she knew what came next. Instead of replying to Victor, She stuffed the phone back into her pocket and walked briskly toward the back exit. The soft sound of her heels against the floor was drowned out by the distant hum of traffic outside. But she wasn't paying attention to the city around her. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying the entire interview. The laughter from the panel, Rachel's smirk, the way her sister had dismissed her with nothing but a glance. She found herself walking through the streets without a clear destination. She passed bustling cafes, noisy pedestrians, and glistening storefronts, but none of it registered. She was numb. The anger was there, simmering beneath the surface, but so was the pain. She had tried to make it, tried to rise above it all, but every time she thought she could take a step forward, she was yanked back by the past, by Rachel, by her family, by herself. As she walked past a park, she stopped. The small, quiet space seemed to call to her. She needed to be alone, to process everything. The soft hum of the city faded away as she sat on a bench beneath the thick branches of an old oak tree, the shadows stretching long in the late afternoon light. For the first time all day, she allowed herself to cry. Not because she was weak, but because she was tired. Tired of being strong, tired of fighting battles no one saw, tired of trying to prove her worth to people who would never understand her. Her tears were a release, but they were also a turning point. As she wiped her eyes, something deep inside her stirred. The years of self-doubt, of fighting for scraps, of trying to fit into places that weren't meant for her, all of it came crashing down. And in that moment, she realized the truth. She hadn't been trying to prove herself to them. She had been trying to prove it to herself. She wasn't just the little sister anymore. She wasn't the person who lived in the shadow of Rachel's perfect life. She wasn't the one who had to ask for a seat at the table. She was the one who would build the table herself. But there was something else, something darker that she hadn't fully acknowledged until now. As the tears dried on her face, she felt a pang of guilt. A quiet, creeping feeling that had been there all along, hiding beneath her anger and pain. Rachel had always been a thorn in her side, but she was also family. Samantha had loved her once. She had looked up to her, trusted her. Hadn't she? The guilt felt like a weight around her chest, pulling her back. Maybe, just maybe, Rachel hadn't meant to hurt her. Maybe, in some twisted way, Rachel had been trying to protect her, in the only way she knew how. She had always been the perfect daughter, the perfect sister, the perfect everything. And maybe Samantha had just been in the way. But no, Samantha stood up, shaking off the thought. She would not let Rachel's actions rewrite her story. Not now, not ever again. As she turned to leave the park, her phone buzzed once more. This time, it was from a number she didn't recognize. "Are you ready to make them see you for who you really are?" The message was brief, but the words cut through her. The sender didn't introduce themselves, didn't need to. She knew who it was. Victor. Samantha's mind raced. What was he asking? Was this a sign? Was she ready to let go of the past once and for all? She didn't have an answer. Not yet. But she did know one thing. She wasn't going back to the conference room to beg for a seat. She was going to show them, all of them, that her worth was never determined by their approval. Have you ever been pushed to the breaking point by those closest to you? How did you find the strength to rise above it? The answers she was looking for were just ahead. But first, she had to face the most difficult decision yet. Could she truly walk away from her family? Or was the need for approval still buried deep inside her, pulling her back toward them? The answer would come soon enough. Samantha took a deep breath as she walked toward the elevator. Her mind was racing, her heart pounding in her chest, but this time there was no hesitation, no second guessing. The past few years had taught her to fight for herself, to rise above the shadows cast by others. But now it was time to take the final step toward something that was truly hers. As she stepped into the elevator, she felt a strange calm wash over her. The metallic hum of the lift, the faint ding of the floor numbers passing by, all seemed to fade into the background. She wasn't looking back this time. The echoes of Rachel's dismissive laughter, the taunts from the panel, the years of being overlooked, they were behind her. But there was one thing left, one final confrontation, one last test. The elevator doors opened, and she stepped out onto the 40th floor, her feet moving with purpose as if they were carrying her to a destiny she had fought for, piece by piece, over the years. The glass walls of the conference room loomed ahead, familiar yet different now. She wasn't just walking into a room full of people who had tried to make her feel small. She was walking into her future. As she entered, the room fell silent and every eye turned toward her. This wasn't the same room she had left earlier. There was something different now, something raw and undeniable in the air. Samantha could feel it, the shift, the unease in the panelists' eyes, the way their confident postures faltered for just a second. Rachel was sitting at the head of the table, her face unreadable, but there was no smile now, no smug superiority. She was just waiting. Samantha's heart fluttered, but it wasn't fear. It was a sense of power she had never felt before. She was no longer invisible. Greg, the senior panelist, shifted in his chair, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Back for more, huh? Haven't had enough yet?" Samantha didn't flinch. She wasn't here to ask for their approval. She was here to take her place, to remind them of something they had all forgotten. "I'm not here to beg," she said, her voice calm and steady, cutting through the silence like a knife. "I'm here because I belong here. You all just didn't bother to see it." Greg's smirk faltered, but Rachel's eyes narrowed, her fingers drumming impatiently on the table. "You've had your moment, but it's over now. You're just not cut out for this." Her words felt like daggers, sharp and cold, but Samantha didn't waver. "No," she said softly, walking toward the table. "What's over is the idea that I need you to tell me who I am. What's over is the belief that my worth is tied to your approval." There was a beat of silence, a pause. And then, for the first time, Rachel's composure cracked. She didn't speak, didn't try to defend herself. She just stared at Samantha, her lips tight, as if she were holding back something deep inside her, something she wasn't ready to let go of. The moment hung in the air, thick with tension. Samantha placed her resume on the table, untouched by red ink, unmarked by dismissal. She was done with the games, done with being the one who had to prove herself. She had already done that. The results were on the table in front of her. And it wasn't just the resume. It was her work, her strength. The years of grinding through the silence and rejection. Rachel's eyes flicked from the resume to Samantha, and in that fleeting moment, Samantha saw something there. It wasn't pity. It wasn't even anger. It was fear. Fear of being exposed, of losing control over the narrative she had carefully crafted for so long. But before Samantha could say anything more, the door to the conference room opened, and Coulter, the CEO, stepped in. He was calm, collected, but there was an undeniable tension in his eyes as he glanced at the panel. "I see we're still playing games here," he said, his voice carrying authority. The room shifted uncomfortably. Rachel's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Coulter walked to the head of the table, his gaze sweeping across the room until it landed on Samantha. "Miss Marin," he said, his voice cool and steady, "would you like to explain why you're here again? I believe I've seen enough, but I want to hear it from you." Samantha met his gaze, unwavering. "I'm here because you didn't see me the first time, and I'm here because I have more to offer than any of them realize. I don't need anyone's approval to know my worth. And I don't need to be part of a game where the rules were written to exclude people like me." Coulter nodded, the slightest flicker of recognition in his eyes. "And what do you want, Miss Marin?" "I want what's mine," she said, her voice firm. "I want to be respected for who I am, not what I'm supposed to be. And I want the chance to show you what I'm capable of. Not because of who I know or where I've been, but because of what I've done." The room was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. And then, as if on cue, Coulter looked at the panel, his expression hardening. "I think it's time we address something." He paused, and the room collectively held its breath. "You see, I've been looking at the footage from earlier today, and I think it's time we acknowledge something important. The treatment Ms. Marin received wasn't just unprofessional. It was unethical. It was personal." He turned to the panel, his gaze fixed. Rachel, I think you've made your position clear, but it's time we address the damage you've done here. Rachel's face turned pale. The room was frozen. And in that moment, the walls Samantha had spent years building around herself began to crack. She wasn't just fighting for a job. She was fighting for something deeper, for the right to exist without apology, to claim her space. Coulter's voice cut through the tension. We're going to rectify this. Ms. Marin, I'm offering you a position here, full-time, with a project lead role. This is your opportunity. You've earned it. Samantha stood there, stunned. The words echoed in her mind, but the truth was already sinking in. This wasn't just a job. It was a rebirth. A moment she'd been waiting for. No, fighting for. The validation didn't come from the title or the position. It came from the realization that she had never needed their approval in the first place. Rachel didn't speak, didn't argue. She just sat there, her face twisted in something between disbelief and regret. Samantha smiled, a slow, quiet smile that said everything. Thank you, I'll take it. As she walked out of the room, the weight that had been on her shoulders for so long seemed to melt away. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't shrinking. Have you ever had to fight for your place in a world that tried to silence you? How did you reclaim your voice? If this story resonated with you, drop a 100 in the comments below. Let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to share this with your friends. Thank you for being a part of Life Stories.